A sudden cry cracked the evening stillness, sharp as a bullet's report ricocheting off rock. Merchants paused, dust-tinted lanterns swinging in surprise, and horses whinnied in their stalls. In Dust Hollow Sunbaked Square, a ragged assembly froze at the sound. One man with merciless eyes thrust a trembling 12-year-old girl forward as if she were livestock. Dust Hollow was no more than a scattering of clapboard buildings and shuttered windows, perched on cracked earth groaning under boots. The wind carried grit in jagged swirls, dust devils dancing like vengeful spirits across the bleached plaza. A battered sign creaked above the trading post. Hayden and Company. Supply. Beyond it lay bleached mine shafts, yawning like open wounds in the desert flank. The rancher paused at the square's edge, gait heavy with weariness. Weathered by solitary years, he wore sun-bleached jeans, a frayed brown duster, and boots cracked down to splintered leather. His hat brim drooped against the sinking sun. He'd come seeking fodder and feed, measure by measure, to salvage his failing herd. Instead, he found desperation in human form, an innocent girl bartered for coin. The creditor, a lean man named Garrett Weber, gripped the girl's thin wrist. His eyes glowed with profit, mouth curled in a cruel grin. "She's collateral," he proclaimed. "Your husband owed me $40. I'll sell her time at 15 cents a day until the debt's paid, collect interest on her labor." He gestured wildly, the girl's shoulders hunched with shame. Every townsperson averted their eyes as if guilt lay with them. The girl's dress was filthy and too large, patched with scraps of burlap. She trembled at every footstep, gaze fixed on scuffed boots as though they might swallow her whole. Her dark hair clung wet to her cheeks, and her lips quivered without sound. She wrapped slender arms around herself, as if trying to shrink inside the heat and humiliation. No one intervened. Not the blacksmith, not the grocer, not the softly whispering townsfolk who blamed her late father's debts for their own missed paydays. Weber's voice rose, thundering like distant hooves. "Who'll bid on this child's days? Who'll take on the cost of a cautionary tale?" He slammed a rusted pistol on a barrel for emphasis. Harried hands rifled through pockets. A single coin clinked. The girl's eyes flicked once toward the battered Latigo pole where merchant wares hung. She dared not look elsewhere. At that moment, the rancher stepped forward. His years in isolation had taught him to choose his battles. But something in the girl's hollow gaze snapped the buried cord inside him. He drew a tarnished gold sovereign from his vest, its weight familiar in his calloused palm. "That covers it," he said, voice low but unwavering. A hush fell. Weber's grin faltered as every eye turned to the stranger. You can't just buy a person," Weber snarled, hand dropping from the girl's wrist to the pistol's grip. The crowd tensed, instinctive fear biting at their heels. The girl's breath hitched. Her knuckles whitened around torn linen. But the rancher held up the coin. "I'll pay your claim. Give me the girl. No strings attached." For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Then Weber's lips twisted in greedy calculation. He snatched the sovereign, counted it once in the lantern's grainy glow, then spat. "Fine. She's yours. Keep her until her worth exceeds my losses." He shoved the girl forward. She stumbled but did not cry out. The rancher knelt, meeting her wide, hollow eyes. "You're safe now," he murmured. He lifted her onto the battered pack horse, saddled for the ride home, gently draping a stained wool blanket about her shoulders. She flinched at the rough wool, but managed a curt nod. The rancher rose, shouldering his duster against the desert chill. Behind them, Garrett Weber tucked the sovereign into his coat and watched with a crooked smirk. Townsfolk exhaled in silent relief, as if the moment had weighed them down like a stone until the sale was done. Horses snorted in empty stalls. Wind tugged at oil-soaked lanterns. They turned west, riding out of the square and onto the plateau's edge. The girl clutched the saddle horn, boots dangling above cracked earth. The rancher guided the horse slowly at first, as though unwilling to disturb her fragile hope. Beyond them, the sun bled behind serrated mesas, scattering orange light across sand and shale. With each measured hoofbeat, the outpost's grit-choked air gave way to open desert. Dust devils trailed in their wake, swirling like lost spirits stirred from slumber. The girl's eyes flicked to the horizon, dark pools reflecting the dying glow, her shoulders curving on themselves. But next to her, the rancher sat upright, steady as carved stone. In the deepening dusk, he finally spoke. "I'm Jonah Blythe," he said, voice rough as gravel. "I run the Red Mesa Ranch, half a day's ride north. Folks think I'm as good as broke." His eyes leaned on her with a careful kindness. "Name?" She looked down, whispering so low her own ears strained. "Mara." Her voice was woven of cracks and sorrow. Then Mara, Jonah said, pressing the horse to a gentle trot, "We'll get you fed and sheltered tonight. You'll work under my roof, not as... Do you understand?" Mara nodded, lips parting but no sound emerging. Shadows pulled under her lashes. Jonah rode on, the night wind tugging at his duster. Beneath him, the cracked earth moaned in the fading warmth, and the tumbleweeds scuttled across the trail like restless souls. Above them, stars ignited in the vast dome of twilight, indifferent and eternal. Yet not everything remained unseen. From the shadows of a low canyon lip, a pair of cold, calculating eyes tracked their every step into the dusk. The moon rose pale and hollow over Red Mesa Ranch, its silver light tracing cracks in the weathered boards. Frost clung to broken fence posts like brittle lace, and a cold wind sighed through the empty stalls. Jonah Blythe guided Mara from the saddle, his leather boots crunching on frostbitten earth. Behind them, the bluffs rose jagged and unwelcoming, dark giants standing sentinel over a homestead that had seen better days. Jonah led Mara toward the cabin's porch, lantern in hand. The structure leaned at odd angles, roof shingles missing, eaves sagging under years of desert storms. A single window flickered with pale light from a sputtering oil lamp. Inside, the air was heavy with the scent of hay, spilled grain, and a faint hint with smoke. Mara's small heels tapped hesitantly on the worn threshold. She paused, shoulders tight, as though the walls might close in. "It's home," Jonah said softly, setting the lantern on a chip table. Its glow revealed every imperfection. Warped boards, a crack snaking up the far wall, a loose nail jutting from a floorboard. He brushed dust from a threadbare quilt on the corner bed. "There's a room for you, if you want it. Warm blankets." Mara pressed her arms around her middle, gaze flicking to the darkness beyond the lamplight. She swallowed and whispered, "Is it safe?" Jonah met her eyes with steady calm. "As safe as a broken ranch can be. No one's coming for you here, at least not tonight." Mara descended the single step into the kitchen. She traced lines in the dust on the rough-hewn table, fingernails dusted white. Jonah filled a tin plate with beans and coarse bread, then ladled coffee into chipped enamel mugs. The steam curled up in lazy plumes, filling the room with warmth. Mara's breaths came quick. She hesitated as Jonah pushed the plate toward her. "You should eat," he encouraged. "Nothing too fancy, but it'll keep you strong." Mara's eyes darted to the beans, then to Jonah's firm hand resting beside her plate. Slowly, she scooped a spoonful. The first taste was damp and earthy. Her shoulders jerked as though surprised by kindness. She lowered her gaze, chewing in near silence. Jonah watched quietly, mind drifting to the girl's haunted expression. She cradled the plate on her lap, knees pulled close. Every clang of spoon on tin echoed in the hush. Outside, the wind tugged a loose shutter, sending it creaking like a distant growl. After a time, Mara set aside the plate and stood. "Thank you," she murmured, voice small. Jonah nodded, offering the blanket folded on the chair. Mara accepted it, wrapping frayed edges around her shoulders. The quilt smelled of tobacco and sheep's wool, but it felt soft and alive against her skin. He guided her to the lean-to by the corral where 2 goats nibbled at straw beneath a lean corrugated roof. Mara flinched at the goats' bleats, then watched the animals with curious eyes. Jonah handed her a handful of hay. They need feeding each night. You ever see goats before? Mara shook her head, tossing the hay gently. The goats tugged at it with swift munches. Mara's lips curved in a faint smile as she held out more. In that simple motion, Jonah saw walls shift within her, fear giving way to fragile trust. They finished feeding the goats together, shadows long under the moon. Jonah spoke softly. When my pa left this place to me, it was a thriving herd, 100 strong. Then drought came, grass died. I lost most of drought, then debts, then storms. Now it's a dozen heads and a leaky roof. Mara glanced up, her eyes catching the pale light, as if searching for sorrow beneath his words. Jonah continued, "But if I have one good thing left, it's this ranch and whoever needs it." He placed a hand on her shoulder. Mara looked down at the rough palm, then at his face, a face carved by sun and grief, yet gentle. They walked back inside, footsteps soft on straw-strewn floor. Jonah stoked the embers of a small hearth fire. Sparks spat against black iron. Mara shivered and Jonah handed her a tin cup of warm cider, its sweet steam swirling upward. She sipped, tasting apple and cinnamon, flavors she hadn't known she missed until that moment. He gestured to a corner bed draped in a patched quilt. "You rest here. Tomorrow, I'll show you the rest, water trough, orchard patch, and maybe a real bed I'm mending." Mara's gaze flickered to the patchwork quilt. Each square a different pattern, some burlap, some old shirts. She touched the soft cotton patch, fingertips brushing threadbare cloth. "It's nice," she said softly. Jonah nodded. "Made by my ma. I'll get you a pillow. Good night." He held the lantern high as Mara climbed onto the bed and curled beneath the quilt, eyes wide but calmer than before. Jonah set the lantern on a barrel by the door. Its glow pooled on the dirt floor. He paused at the threshold, hand on the frame, looking back at Mara asleep in the lantern light. Her chest rose and fell in slow rhythm, the blanket cocooning her fragility. He realized her body finally claimed rest, even beneath the ranch's imperfections. Outside, the wind rattled a loose panel on the roof. Frost formed icicles on windowsills as Jonah closed the door. He moved to the porch, lantern now low, and scanned the moonlit bluffs beyond the table and chairs that held empty mugs from earlier. The night lay silent and vast, only the goats rustling in their lean-to. A distant ridge cut a jagged silhouette against the moon. Jonah's breath fogged white as the wind whispered through broken fence lines. Then a shape appeared where none should be. A lone rider silhouette loomed against a moonlit ridge, unmoving, dark as a shadow. Jonah's heart thudded. He held the lantern steady, flame flickering over gravel and fence pickets. Mara was inside, trusting him, while the watcher from Dust Hollow gazed on. Jonah raised his lantern higher, its glow sweeping the ridge. The rider remained still, a silent question in the quirks of his horse's stance. In that moment, Jonah understood the desert's truth. In this frontier, even the broken can find a place to mend, but only if they face the coming dawn together. A lone rider silhouette loomed against a moonlit ridge. The wind tore across the scrubland, carrying thunder rolling like a war drum from the distant bluffs. Rain began in silver sheets, lashing warped cabin walls and turning the dusty corral into a quagmire of churned mud. Jonah Blythe braced himself beneath the porch eaves as the lone rider swung down from his mount, cloak dripping, boots sloshing through puddles. The man's hat brim was pulled low, oilskin clung to broad shoulders. He planted a gloved hand on the cabin's wooden railing and let the lantern's glow reveal the hard set of his jaw. Mara pressed close behind Jonah, eyes wide but steady, a silent promise that she would stand by his side. Jonah stepped forward, voice muted by rain. "You shouldn't be here," he said. The claimant's gaze flicked to Mara, whose small frame trembled under a borrowed blanket. "Name's Cutter Finch," the rider replied, tone as cold as the wind. "Garrett Weber sent me. The girl belongs to him until her labor covers her debt. You're in his way, rancher." Mara's breath hitched. Lightning split the sky, illuminating Cutter's scarred cheek. He looked every inch the enforcer Weber would dispatch. Uncompromising, ruthless. Jonah squared his shoulders. He'd faced drought, debt, even desert bandits, but he'd never bowed to a man's cruelty when an innocent life hung in a balance. "She's free," Jonah said firmly. "I paid her debt. You'll find no claim here." Cutter's lips twisted. He spat a stream of water into the mud. "I've orders," he warned. "Bring her back tonight, or I'll return with fire and steel. You'll regret crossing Weber." He touched the butt of a Winchester rifle slung low at his hip. A crack of thunder rattled the porch beams. Rain sluiced across the planks in rivulets. "Then leave," Jonah said, voice low but unwavering. "I won't hand her over." Cutter studied Jonah's face, lit by lantern and lightning alike. "In this storm," he said after a pause, "courage is the only shelter." With that, he strode back into the deluge, mounting his horse with the ease of a trained killer. His silhouette vanished against the swirling rain, leaving a whisper of leather and malice. Inside the cabin, Jonah latched the door and bolted the heavy timber bar. Mara dropped the blanket and ran her fingers along the rough latch, eyes bright with newfound resolve. "He'll come back," she whispered. Jonah nodded, voice hopeful in its steadiness. "Then we'll be ready." He grabbed 2 lengths of rail and wedged them under the door's crossbeam. Each scrap would grate against the sill, a makeshift barricade built from fences long broken. He piled overturned chairs against the opposite window and tied curtains over every shuttered board. Mara watched, shoulders straightening. The old terror that once drove her to cower in shadows began to ebb. She reached for a coil of rope and carried tin buckets into the lean-to. Rainwater pooled beneath the goats, and she scooped it into each bucket with surprising confidence, setting it by the cabin door as a last line of defense, drenching any torches Cutter might bring. Jonah paused at the threshold, struck by her silent courage. "Thank you," he said softly as she handed him a pail. Mara met his eyes and nodded once, an unspoken bond forged in the storm's fury. Jonah moved to his bunk and retrieved a rifle he'd long kept for predators. The metal was cool in his palms, rifling cold comfort against the night's unknowns. Mara stood beside him, dwarfed by the weapon's heft, but her gaze remained fixed on the drumming rain beyond the window. "Don't let him break you," Jonah said. She swallowed, voice hushed. "I won't." Outside, the wind howled through gaps in the roof. The cabin shuddered as though afraid. Lightning forked across the sky, plunging them into darkness between charges of brilliance. Each flash revealed the corral's churned earth, sodden ground that churned like wet clay under hoof prints. As the wind screamed, Jonah and Mara worked side by side, he binding planks more securely, she twisting rope around sagging beams. The storm's roar muffled their footfalls, but not the thud of their hearts, which beat in tandem with each crashing boom of thunder. Then, in the tempest's heart, a sudden crack split the air as an unseen branch tore free from a high bluff and clattered to the roof. The cabin groaned beneath the weight of the storm's assault. Rain seeped in through a gash in the eaves, dripping onto the floor in stinging rivulets. Mara flinched, then grabbed a battered saddle blanket and pressed it against the leak. Jonah tossed aside a lantern and fetched the oilskin cloak he'd stripped from his horse. Together, they layered scrap cloth over the hole, fashioning a crude patch. Despite the chill, warmth glowed in Mara's eyes, proof of her burgeoning resilience. The storm reached its peak as midnight approached. The wind roared like a locomotive, rain pounded with unrelenting force, and thunder shook the earth. In the yard beyond the cabin, the contest between man and nature revealed a hidden truth. The soaked ground began to shift, and the standing water pooled into new shapes. As Jonah crouched to tighten a window shutter, something dark glimmered beneath the milky surface, an edge of parchment, its corners curled. A piece of paper, half buried in mud, floated on raindrops. He waded into the muck, chest high in the fierce rains, and retrieved the soaking sheet. The ink bled across its surface, turning words into smears, but a seal remained visible, a stylized W with a serrated edge, Weber's mark. Mara emerged, water trickling from her hair, and peered over his shoulder. "What is it?" she asked, voice full of wonder and dread. Jonah's brow furrowed as he studied the sodden letter. Torn and barely legible, it hinted at a debt far greater than simple labor, that others, darker figures, knew of Mara's worth beyond coin. Lightning split the heavens as Jonah slipped the letter into his jacket. Rain streamed off the collar, carrying a chill that pierced both coat and resolve. He turned to Mara, blinking as if crossing realms. Her small face held fierce calm. She would stand with him through any storm. Thunder rumbled. The cabin shuddered once more, and the truth within that mud-streaked parchment threatened to wash away every hope they'd salvaged. As the wind tore the shuttered windows and rain rattled the door's makeshift bar, Jonah realized the letter's secrets might bring ruin upon them both. A sodden letter surfaced from mud, its ink bleeding into secrets and into promise of what awaited at dawn. Jonah sat by the half-whispering embers of dawn's dying fire, the sodden letter clutched in his hand. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the corrals and yard a tangle of churned mud and broken fences. Lantern light flickered against drips from the eaves. He unfolded the paper, fingers slick with rainwater. Weber's seal, the jagged W pressed in red wax, remained stubbornly visible. Through blurred ink, he made out words hinting at far more than unpaid labor, a bounty, a hidden price on Mara's head. Her worth, it seemed, reached far beyond simple debt. Mara awoke on the cabin's narrow cot, quilt folded around her shoulders. She saw Jonah's grim face in the lantern glow and climbed down to stand beside him. "What is it?" she whispered, voice as fragile as a thin glass lamp. Jonah pressed a letter into her palm. "This is someone's paying more to have you back than 15 cents a day," he said gently. Her brow furrowed in confusion and fear. "Then I'm worth more than I thought," she murmured, eyes darting to the dripping window. Jonah rose, coat brushing the table. He tucked the letter into his dusted pocket. "Whatever they want will protect you," he vowed. Mara met his gaze with a new steadiness. She'd faced a creditor once. Now she faced a darker threat, a bounty hunter or bandit paid to drag her away. Outside, the wind still whispered through broken planks. The ranch seemed to hold its breath. They spent the morning reinforcing defenses. Jonah hammered boards over windows. Mara passed nails and scraps of wood. Each slap of hammer echoed in the empty yard. Behind them, the barn sagged under winter's weight. Broken fence posts leaned at odd angles. She worked beside him without flinching, shoulders straight, determination on her young face. Jonah paused to catch her hand in his. "You're braver than you know," he told her. Mara managed a small smile. "I learned from the best." By midday, the sun broke through ragged clouds. The landscape glistened, muddy earth reflecting haze of light. Distant vultures wheeled overhead, circling like silent judges. Jonah peered at the horizon. Dust clouds stirred where hoofbeats thundered across the plain. Figures emerged, a dozen bandits, rifles at the ready, led by a hulking man with a wide-brimmed hat and cruel grin. Their leader spat into the mud, eyes fixed on the cabin. Jonah strode to the doorway, Mara at his side. "You won't take her," he shouted over the rumble of hooves. The bandit leader laughed, voice low and threatening. "Weber's gold bought more than your pity," he replied. "Hand her over, or we claim what's ours." A younger outlaw loosed a rifle round that thudded into the corral fence, sending splinters flying. Barricades trembled under gunfire. Mara flinched but did not step back. Jonah lifted his Winchester and took aim. Mara let out a steadying breath. "Use the terrain," he whispered. "Keep low." She ducked behind a wagon wheel, then sprinted to cut a loose fence rail, dragging it back to shore up the cabin's vulnerable side. Her small frame strained, but she refused to stop. Jonah fired warning shots overhead, steel flashing in the sun. The bandits recoiled, momentarily startled by the rancher's resolve. Into that moment stormed an unexpected ally. A battered wagon rattled onto the yard, drawn by a rangy horse with clipped ears. From it stepped a grizzled trader named Silas Boone, arms laden with crates of tools and provisions. He bore scars that matched Jonah's, and his eyes gleamed with wry recognition. "Heard there was trouble on your land," Silas called, hefting a box of extra rifles across his shoulder. "Figured you could use a hand." Mara blinked, breath caught between relief and wonder. Silas's arrival emboldened Jonah. Together, they set traps. Holes concealed by straw, barrels rigged to spill gravel over anyone who toppled them, sharpened stakes hidden in underbrush facing the corral gate. Mara joined in, placing a coil of rope beneath a plank to trip the first bandit who chased her across the yard. As the outlaws charged, the trap snapped shut. One man fell, gravel spraying like gunfire. Mara's heart pounded, but she remained steady, helping Silas reload the trader's rifle. Dust clouds rose as more bandits pressed forward. Jonah and Silas fired from cover, dropping 2 men behind battered barrels. Mara peeked out from her hiding spot, rifle in hand, then aimed and fired at an approaching rider. The shot rang true, ringing off steel breastplate, and the man reeled back. His screams mingled with the rattling clatter of spurred boots. Jonah nodded at Mara's courage. "In this fight," he called to Silas over the din, "loyalty is the sharpest blade." A final charge faltered when Silas unleashed a crate of tar and oil onto the main gate. The lead bandit flared a torch, but the oil hissed and smoked, forcing the halt. Smoke curled skyward, masking silhouettes as the bandits drew back into the gathering dusk. Their leader spat and spat again, hat brim shadowing his snarling face. "This ain't over," he vowed, voice cold as desert night. With that, he mounted his horse and led the retreat. Dust clouds choking the air swallowed their figures until they vanished over the horizon. Jonah lowered his rifle, shoulders trembling with adrenaline. Mara dropped to her knees, hands shaking as she rubbed a grazing wound on her forearm. Silas approached, patting her shoulder with a gruff smile. "You saved this place today," he said. Mara managed a weary grin. Jonah retrieved the soaked letter from his pocket, wiping mud from its surface. The hidden bounty, the deeper threat, it was far from ended. But for now, Red Mesa Ranch stood, its defenders battered but unbowed. The bandit leader spat, "This ain't over," and vanished into the desert. Dawn crept across Red Mesa Ranch in muted gold, painting the battered fences and churned earth with a promise of renewal. Jonah Blythe stood at the corral gate, rifle in hand, as the first bandit riders reappeared like ghosts on the horizon. Their leader, coat tattered, hat brim low, spurred a dozen desperate men toward a homestead that had repelled them once. Mara perched at Jonah's side, silhouette steady against the rising sun. Neither spoke. The quiet crackle of morning wind carried more threat than any pistol shot. Between 2 wills, one for vengeance, the other for protection, the fate of the day balanced. Silas Boone appeared at Jonah's elbow, panting from the run back to the Casaba. "I rallied most of Dust Hollow," he reported. "They'll be here any moment." True to his word, townsfolk poured over the ridge, ranch hands, blacksmith sons, neighbors, each clutching rifles, pitchforks, or lanterns. Mothers clutched shawls around children peeking from behind wagons. Every newcomer's face shone with determination. They formed a ragged but resolute line behind Jonah and Mara, closing ranks like a protective circle around the young girl whose life had become their cause. Across the yard, the bandits hesitated, reassessing the odds as rifles gleamed and voices rose in unified resolve. The leader spat and raised his pistol. "You'll regret this," he snarled. In response, Jonah stepped forward into the pale light. "You already do," he replied quietly. "Now ride on and never return." At his side, Mara straightened, eyes bright with fierceness that matched his own. They were no longer rancher and rescued child. They were partners in defense of a home they'd built together. A single shot cracked the morning stillness, Jonah's warning across the dusty divide. A bandit fell from his horse, spurring the rest into a panic retreat. Mara stepped off the porch and raised her own pistol, firing another shot that clipped the bandit's boot heel and sent him sprawling into mud. Cheers rose from the townsfolk line, voices carrying across the yard like flares of hope. Silas thumped his boot against a barrel, rallying the community forward. "Let's finish this," he bellowed. An ordinary farmer's charge, using pitchforks to disarm the outlaws who lingered too close. In the scramble, Mara darted between wagons and barrels, spotting the leader struggling to mount his horse. She raced forward, heart pounding, and yanked at his coat tail. He whipped around, pistol leveled. Mara's eyes met his without flinching. Then, with a sudden flick, she struck his wrist with the pistol, but the weapon clattered to the dirt. Before he could regain balance, Jonah closed in and cuffed leather ties around his wrists. The leader glared, realizing he'd lost the fight not just guns, but to the unity of a community he'd scorned. Within minutes, the skirmish was over. Bandits surrendered or fled, dragging horses through churned ground. The leader spat a final curse and vanished into the desert haze, defeated but alive, his vow of vengeance echoing hollowly behind him. Mara lowered her pistol, relief washing over her features. Neighbors stepped forward to help gather the wounded and sort raided supplies. Jonah surveyed the aftermath. Broken fence rails, hoof prints in thick mud, and faces alight with the triumph of selfless courage. Asgen smoke drifted away, and the sun warmed wet boots. The Casaba folks set to work repairing what the bandits had damaged. Hammer and nail sang together, echoing across the yard as posts were reforged and rail by rail replaced. A tired but grateful Jonah accepted a cup of strong coffee from a neighbor's outstretched hand. Mara knelt beside a buckled fence, lacing straw into gaps until sunbeams drifted through the slats like blessings. Every strike of hammer and every braid of straw wove tighter the bonds between this once isolated ranch and the thriving community it now anchored. In the clear corral, Silas laid out a small sapling he'd brought from town, a young cedar with tender roots wrapped in burlap. Jonah and Mara knelt together to cradle it in a shallow hole beside the orchard ruins. Mara's fingers trembled as she pressed rich soil around the sapling's base. "May you grow tall and strong," she whispered, "just like the family we become." Jonah placed his hand over hers, sealing the promise in the gentle dusk of morning's glow. The sapling, fragile and new, represented every hope they'd nurtured through storm and strife. Neighbors circled around, offering loose soil and water from buckets, soft words and blessings for prosperity. One by one, they wrote their names on small wooden slats and pinned them to nearby fence posts, markers of unity and protectors of what Mara now called home. Jonah rose and helped Mara to her feet, dusting straw from her dress. She stood proudly, the silver locket gleaming against her chest where a torn piece had once hung broken. Now it swung whole and bright, a testament to her journey from bondage to belonging. Jonah gathered the community close before calling out, "In this desert, a family is forged not by blood, but by heart." His voice rang clear above the rustle of wind-stirred leaves. Mara stepped forward to add her own words, voice steady. "I'm Mara Blythe," she announced, "and this is my home." The word Blythe echoed through the yard, cementing her place in Jonah's life and in the town's shared hearts. Applause rose, soft smiles lit every face, and a new chapter began beneath the boundless sky. As morning fully ignited the valley, man and woman and child stood shoulder to shoulder, no longer strangers or bystanders, but stewards of a restored ranch. Mara slipped an arm through Jonah's and rested her head against his shoulder. "Thank you," she said quietly, eyes alight with gratitude. He wrapped his duster around her shoulders, pulling her close. "We saved each other," he replied. "Now let's grow something worth a lifetime." Beneath them, earth warmed in the sun. Above, Red Rock Bluff stood silent guard. The wagon creaked as Silas loaded his last crate, lanterns swaying in the breeze. He tipped his hat to Jonah and Mara. "I'll ride on," he said, voice rough but kind. "But I'll be back to check on that cedar." Mara waved, heart full, as neighbors helped him hitch horses and tuck reclaimed tools into saddlebags. Then, with a final nod, Silas spurred his team away from Red Mesa, disappearing down the trail toward horizons unknown. Jonah and Mara lingered on the porch as community life resumed across the valley. Horses ambled back into their pens. Children chased goats in the paddocks. The scent of fresh stew drifted from the cabin's open door. The world felt wide again, no longer solely a place of hardship, but a home of hope. Mara tightened her grip on Jonah's hand and smiled up at him, eyes bright. In that moment, the dust settled not just on fences, but on old sorrows, leaving fertile ground for dreams grown from unity and courage. If this tale of resilience inspired you, subscribe for more Wild West stories of courage and hope.